Look, it's a tradition that started with Richard Nixon, which is why people have been asking Donald Trump about his tax returns since he started even thinking about running for president.
I'll produce my tax returns, absolutely, and I would love to do that.
I will absolutely give my return, but I'm being audited now.
I can't release tax returns when there's an audit.
In fact, we counted at least 16 times that Donald Trump said he wanted to release his taxes. And an audit isn't the only reason he's pumped the brakes. He also found a way to weaponize his returns.
Maybe I'm going to do the tax returns when Obama does his birth certificate.
And, of course, hit Hillary Clinton.
I will release my tax returns against my lawyer's wishes when she releases her 33,000 emails that have been deleted.
Get this. Trump even played the God card to explain his game of hide the taxes.
I'm a strong Christian, and I feel strongly about it, and maybe there's a bias.
Spoiler alert, if Donald Trump is still being audited, God's got nothing to do with it. In fact, there is no legal reason an audit would prevent him from releasing his taxes. Nixon released his taxes precisely because he was under audit, not in spite of it.
People have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
Not only that, former IRS chief, as well as Trump's own pick for the post, both said the IRS doesn't chase after any filer year after year after year, as Trump has claimed. So it should be clear by now that the audit excuse isn't worth the 1040 it's printed on. So other excuses had to take its place.
Nobody cares. The only one who cares is, you and a few people that asked that question.
We litigated this all through the election. People didn't care.
So actually, people do care. Around 74% of Americans said Trump should release his taxes when Kellyanne said that. Now Team Trump is giving up any pretense of an excuse.
Do you believe Democrats will never see the president's tax returns?
Oh, no, never. No, nor should they.
So we're left asking, what's the president trying to hide? Now, there are a few possibilities. First, President Trump isn't as rich as he says he is. We know he's inflated his wealth for years and seems really insecure about the size of his bank account.
I'm rich. I'm much richer than people think. I'm much richer, right? You see, much richer.
Second, he could be paying far less tax than any normal working American. For example, when you're scrambling to pay your taxes next week, some of the super rich pay nothing thanks to loopholes. Take Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, for example, who paid almost no federal income taxes for years, despite being worth a cool $300 million. Third, he might be concerned that his taxes reveal undisclosed income from foreign sources, which could raise questions of entanglements. Fourth, releasing his returns just complicate his life, as Michael Cohen told Congress.
What he didn't want was to have an entire group of think tanks that are tax experts run through his tax return and start ripping it to pieces.
So, for what it's worth, Cohen added he didn't think Trump was under audit at all in 2016. So, only Trump's tax returns can clear up these key questions. Now, Democrats are using an obscure anti-corruption law to compel their release, and the president is digging in. So, buckle up for a court fight in the coming months that could be titled Trump versus Transparency. And that's your reality check.
The Treasury Department refused a request from House Democrats to see President Trump's tax returns. And acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney is doubling down on the administration's refusal. In an interview for this week's episode of The Takeout, he told CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett that Congress is never going to get them.
The Treasury Secretary this week informed Richard Neal, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, that the Treasury Department, after consulting the Justice Department, will not provide the president's taxes. You've gone on the record saying Congress will never see them.
That's absolutely right.
Why?
Because they're not entitled to see them by law. By the way, they know, especially on this one, they know they're never going to get these documents. This is a pure show pony type of situation. They know the legal reasons they can get those documents. And
legitimate legislative function.
Right, and they're not even close to that.
However, lawmakers may be able to see the president's state tax returns if a bill recently passed by the New York State Senate is approved by the state assembly and signed into law. The legislation would allow the state's Department of Taxation and Finance to share returns with certain congressional committees. New York State Senator Brad Hoylman introduced this legislation. He's a Democrat who represents New York's 27th Senate District. Senator, thanks so much for being with us again.
Thanks for having me, Ray.
So before the bill passed, State Senate Minority Leader John Flanagan, a Republican, told New York One, quote, "The issues that are taking place at the federal government level should be within the purview and authority of the federal government. This is a blatantly political act." What's your response to that?
My response is we as New Yorkers shouldn't be bystanders to the preservation of our democracy and the preservation of the rule of law. You know, Elaine, no one is above the law, even the President of the United States. Congress has the right to federal returns, including the president's, and they often ask for them. This goes back to 1924. Well, we in New York State can do something to assist Congress in its oversight responsibility by providing the state returns to one of the 3 congressional committees that has the federal right to do the same thing in Washington.
So you just reject out of hand the notion that the state level really has no jurisdiction in this matter?
Well, I believe, in fact, that we have a responsibility to stand up for other legislators who have that important oversight responsibility. Look, the state of New York routinely shares tax returns of New Yorkers with other states and the federal government. Through this legislation, we're just creating a third avenue with which New York State can share tax returns. One of the 3 tax committees, whether it be House Ways and Means, Senate Finance, or the Joint Committee on Taxation.
Well, there was an alternative proposal which would have limited the returns available for release to certain elected officials. Why not bring that bill forward?
Well, this is the bill that we've settled on because this is the bill that currently Congress needs to do its job. Donald Trump has broken over 40 years of political tradition by not releasing his tax returns, by stonewalling the American people, saying he was under audit, at one time promising he would release them, and now his administration saying under no circumstances will Congress receive those returns. New York can step into that void and help, I believe, avoid this constitutional showdown by passing this legislation.
So we mentioned that Treasury Secretary Mnuchin denying a House request for the president's taxes, which could lead to legal challenges. How concerned are you about that? What are you doing to prepare for that potential of a legal challenge happening?
Well, I think our bill is narrowly tailored, and at the same time, it applies to everyone. So you can't argue that this is a so-called bill of attainder that's directed at one person. This would apply to all New Yorkers. As a matter of fact, the federal government right now, those congressional committees have the right to get anyone's tax returns at the federal level. We're just providing a new avenue for them to obtain those taxes at the state level.
So your bill still needs to pass the state assembly and be signed into law by Governor Cuomo. The governor is often critical of the president, and Mr. Trump has called Cuomo and other state lawmakers, quote, presidential harassers. I mean, are you concerned at all that perhaps this legislation could end up benefiting the president, politically speaking?
I think that we as legislators, as public servants, as officials of the state of New York have to stand up for the rule of law. Our democracy is being undermined by a president that is flouting the will of Congress. We can do something about it here in the state of New York, Donald Trump's home, and the home to many of his companies, by passing this legislation.
So for people who say, look, the more that Democrats, whether it be New York State Democrats, whether it be Democrats in Washington, continue to pursue this issue, the more that the president's base will be energized by this, you say?
I say it's time to stand up to for the rule of law and to understand that no one's above it, not even the highest holder of the White House.
All right, before we let you go, I want to ask you about the 2020 campaign. A quick question. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio is reportedly weighing a run. How do you feel about him potentially entering the race?
Well, I think, like others have said, he needs to enter it to actually, for any of us to have an opinion. But I think he's got a lot of work on his table here in the city of New York. And I think New Yorkers really want him to do his job here in the city. And
it doesn't sound like you think that's a good idea for him to enter.
I think it's very hard when you have, the second toughest job in the country to go off and try to run for the first one simultaneously. I think it's a real challenge for him in order to do both of those jobs at the same time.
All right. State Senator Brad Hoylman. Senator, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Wilfred, that's right. This news coming from a courthouse in Manhattan where a judge has just ruled in a lawsuit that Deutsche Bank and Capital One may go ahead now and comply with a subpoena from congressional Democrats to turn over financial records relating to President Trump, the Trump Organization, and the Trump family. You remember that the Trump family had sued in court to block that subpoena. They said that this subpoena was simply overly broad. It was just a fishing expedition by members of Congress. The judge, though, disagreeing with that argument here, as a separate judge already did earlier in the week in a related case involving the Trump Organization accounting firm. So now it would appear that both the accounting firm and the two financial entities will be giving these documents over to Democrats up on Capitol Hill. That is pending any appeal that might happen in this process. But Deutsche Bank and Capital One now told by a judge they can go ahead and turn those records over to Democrats on Capitol Hill, guys.